There we go. So we're here. It's a Language of Healing discussion group, and it's May 19th, 2020. And today we're going to explore some issues surrounding race in America. And we've got some folks in the room.
Yeah, my name's Wayne Jacobson. I'm one of the authors along with Bob Prater and Arnita Taylor. Our moderator today is Gil Michelle. Gil is the founding pastor of That Church Downtown, an inner-city church in South Bend, Indiana, planted in 2013. Was intended to reach an unchurched population and create a place of authenticity, transparency, and growth for those who seek it in Christ. He's also, he has a passion for regional and citywide revival by way of unity and prayer. He also owns and operates an accounting firm, the Caleb Group, and assists small businesses and churches throughout the United States. Gil, welcome, and thank you for taking on this brave challenge.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you. Thank you guys for trusting me with this responsibility and for the book that kind of brought us all here, A Language of Healing for a Polarized Nation. I don't know if there's probably any better time for a book like that to have been written. So thank you. Shall I proceed? Shall I continue running with the ball? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Well, today we're having a discussion. Many of you maybe were on the prior discussion group or the live session that happened where Kyle moderated that one. That was geared toward youth and engaging youth. Today, we're going to be talking about the very bland topic of race and how that informs how we interact with one another. Particularly, we want to talk a little bit more specifically about how the recent Ahmaud Arbery case that happened down in Georgia, sort of the details of that case, and then how that has maybe ripped the scab off for some people, created multiple points of discussion for others about the topic of race in America and how we're dealing with that, how we're actually navigating through those type of conversations. And so again, this book, Language of Healing, came out just a few months ago. Shortly before, it seemed like a lot of momentum was being gained right before COVID hit. And so I like the way you guys, the authors, Wayne, Bob, Arnita, have pivoted in a pretty cool way so that these discussions can happen online and engage people in comment sections so that we could actually have civil discourse about this topic. So, first of all, let me just kind of start a little bit on giving a little bit of the details for those who are on the call or maybe listening who don't know maybe what I'm talking about. I don't want to assume that everyone does know. But back in February, young man, 25 years old, Ahmaud Arbery, was murdered in the street. He was killed in the street by two men, father and son, who allegedly reported a robbery at a house that was under construction. There was a confrontation in the street where he was simply jogging. And these two gentlemen, I'm using that loosely, excuse me, something in my throat.
Okay.
Conducted a citizen's arrest on him and resulted in his murder or his death. And so, this happened in February, but nothing occurred. These two gentlemen were not arrested until a video leaked around the first week of May, I believe it was. Second week of May, a video leaked of the actual incident that happened on the street there where he was jogging. And because of that public outcry and the demand for justice, those two men were then arrested shortly thereafter. And so, in sort of starting this discussion, I'd like to ask the authors, all three. I'll start with Arnita first. because this is, I believe, because you're all are Christians, and I want to come at it from that angle. What do you believe that the church should be doing, or what responsibility the church has, or Christians have, in dealing with social justice issues like the Arbery case?
You know, that's a very good question. If the listeners have read A Language of Healing, I tell stories. It's an anecdotally written book, so I tell several stories about myself being planted by God into predominantly white churches and some of my experiences there. In my opinion, certainly the church has to have a voice into racism, because racism is sin. It's just sin. Just like any other sin that we have to have our mind renewed for, it's the same thing. I am also acutely aware that if you don't know that you're racist, you will never address racism. And what I find is a lot of denial sometimes in churches and church leaders, that we just don't have it here, which is probably not true unless your congregation is truly a homogenous congregation. I know in some corporate churches, it is not unifying to talk about race. You know, we see that as not being something that is good. I've even gone so far to hear a church say that social justice initiatives are sin. So it's the gamut on this. This is what I will say. If you are a multicultural, multi-ethnic church, you should be addressing racism and discussing people in racism and how to anti-racism moves. You just should. So I'll just leave it at there. I do see the church as being one individual at a time, which is how we wrote A Language of Healing. If we can get over indifference and being able to just relate to people who are different and not victim shaming and some things at an individual level, we can certainly help change the trajectory of being afraid to talk about race in church.
Thank you. Wayne, what are your thoughts?
My biggest thought would be we've got to help humanize people who are different from us. I think that's what underlines a lot of these kinds of issues. Is it doesn't seem like my people got hurt, so I choose one side of an issue, or mine did, and then I choose that side. And now we're arguing facts about a case that are still somewhat in dispute. And we're not talking about the larger issue as to why these things keep happening. If you just took the race of the various people involved in this conflict and switched them, so it was white people, a white person happening to a black, two people chase them down with a pickup with black people, you would have a very different, I think most people I know have a very different response. And if you can get your head around that we all are invested in these things. It's like when there's a big aircraft crash overseas, and one of the things the media wants to report to me is how many Americans were on board, because that will humanize it for us. And we really got to get over the idea that only Americans, only white Americans, only black Americans are worth caring about, that it's all our people. And we've got to figure out how we humanize each other better and see each other as humans. And I think one of the ways we encourage you in the book is you've got to know people that are different than you. And if you don't, you won't get invested in what other people are experiencing in that same incident. Because I'd love to ask the panel at some point, you know, what did you feel when you first heard that story? What was your first emotional response? And that I think would tell a lot.
Good. Okay, we'll get to that actually. Bob, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well, on the question that was posed.
Well, Arnita mentioned that if you're a multicultural church, this is incumbent upon you to address this. I'm going to say even if you're not a multicultural church, because we all know the most racist, segregated hour in America is Sunday mornings at 10 or 11, wherever you might be. And so we tend to sit in pews with people who look like us. And trust me, it's people that look like me that need to have this discussion. I just had a discussion yesterday with a man. I was doing a Zoom session, and I brought up that this was going to be happening today. And it didn't take 10 seconds for these words to come out. And this is a man who knows God, who's part of a church. And he said, well, you know, isn't it true that he kind of ran at them?
Mm.
Isn't it true that he kind of ran at them? And can I be honest? I said some words that I can't repeat for real. I said people like X, Y, and Z might think that. I said, but you don't think that, do you? And so the problem goes deep. I mean, it's systemic, clear back. The solutions, we can't just flip a switch and expect hearts to be changed, because this really is a heart issue. Arnita talked about, you know, the social justice stuff being kind of a taboo thing for the church, and in many churches it is, because they think that the simple gospel just covers it all, and the simple gospel is powerful, but they don't realize that the simple gospel includes social justice.
Yes.
I mean, it does at its core. That's who Jesus was, to take care of the poor. I live my life by Proverbs 31, 8 and 9. And it says to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. And then it gives you the list. It says the destitute, the poor, and those who cannot. So we have a responsibility, and especially people that look like me and Wayne, who are part of, in this country, the dominant culture. We have a responsibility to speak for those who often don't have a voice.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
Gil, just to
Yes.
add, you know, none of us can bring healing to something we don't understand. But if we don't have understanding, we can at least link with someone who can help us get better in understanding. And that's
Very
in
good.
general. That starts at a one person to one person place. So as Bob said, you know, he can talk to me and get a level of understanding. He can talk to Arlena, get another one. You know, you can do that, but it has to start with the desire to
Right.
get the understanding that we need to change one person at a time.
Absolutely. Well, let me open this up to those who are on our panel. You'll see a multitude of faces here. So please chime in if there's anyone who would like to add. Maybe let me twist the question a little bit and add the context that maybe Wayne introduced. How did you feel when you saw the news of this case? And how did it inform you as, if whether or not you're a Christian or not, your faith and how you viewed that through that lens?
I'll start, Brother Gilbert. It was anguish followed by anger. I was like, not again. First of all, I hurt for the man's family. I hurt again that, you know, we as a human being, as how do I say that? Dr. Eddie Glaude talks about in his book, Democracy in Black, there was a value gap that's happened again, that our lives aren't valued to the point where you feel you can take the law in your hands and just pull the trigger. Then I got angry. I was like, you got to be kidding me. This country has had 20 of these in the last 5 years that we've known about. We're not talking about the ones that we don't know about, but the ones that we know about. Here we go again. When is this country going to learn the lesson? We keep going around and around and around this mountain again and again and again. When are we as a country are going to say enough is enough? And that's where my anger came in. Yes, I hurt as an African-American male. I thought it could happen to me. But then I saw, again, the lack of empathy from some of my other brothers and sisters. Then I began to get angry and said, I can't take this anymore. Enough is enough.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I think we're all going to be super considerate of each other and give the next person opportunity. Like Keith, I felt an array of emotions. I am the mother to 2 amazing Black boys. I am the wife of an amazing Black man. And I felt fear because as a mother, I know that could be my son. No matter how well I'm raising him to be, it's my child. And so to have to live with that level of fear is, you know, is one of those things we can't put words to. And to really add to that, just recently I experienced a level of hate simply because of the color of my skin. I had to call out the Bakersfield Police Department and file a report. And what I found out is that the law protects that other person because our system is racist and our system do not protect my little Black boys, right? I have wonderful friends who do not have the same skin color as me who are angered by this. But until we change our system, we're going to continue having this conversation over and over again. So for me, it was a matter of fear, not just because I saw my boy in his eyes, because I just experienced it, no matter how good of a citizen I am. To some people, that is all they see is a skin color. And so what we have to do is what we're doing now. We have to all have anger and rage in our eyes and in our voices, no matter what color we are. And so for me, I felt helpless because there was nothing that I can do. If someone wants to do that, the system will protect them as it has these two young men. And I will never be able to say goodbye properly to my boy. So for me, it was personal and it was fearful.
Thank you.
Gilbert,
Anyone else? Yeah.
I was sick, like physically ill, when I finally heard about it. And like Keith, I know it was a lot of anger. And we have a African-American grandson who is 5. So this stuff has been like too real. And so I know there was fear there. I really think though, I was just sick. It was a lynching. And I was going to look that word up before I used it, but that's what came to my mind. The word was, this is a lynching. And I remember teaching my children about the history of our country. And I remember them looking up at me and going, this doesn't happen anymore, right? They can't do this anymore. And so I'm still kind of sick by it. One thing I shared with Wayne what I did, I had to, because Arnita and Wayne were here in February, just before this thing broke out with the virus, and gave kind of a workshop for our community. And you could tell people wanted them to give them the answers. Like, okay, these are the steps that we're going to get to change this. This has to stop. And so these are the steps. This is the program we're going to follow. And, by the end, it was what Arnita already just said, one to one person at a time, which, you get impatient with it. I'm over this whole thing. I'm so mad that it still goes on. But so I had to speak to somebody, not in my in-group. I just went up to a total stranger, and thank goodness she was full of grace, because I was just weeping and I needed to apologize. I just said, I am so sorry that this happens. I'm just sorry. And it released a lot of the emotion I was feeling in my gut about it. And she was really good. She was a great, sweet conversation. And it was a really sweet conversation. She said, this is working both sides.
Yeah.
We are really in a mess, and it's really going to take a lot from both sides. So I was grateful for the encounter. And
thank you. Thank you, Joan. Anyone else?
I know for me, I can't sit here and say that I had a strong emotional response of any kind in terms of fear or anger. So I guess we'd probably describe it just kind of like a numbness to the frequency of it, that which would have been every couple times a year. I think because of social media and technology, we're hearing about these cases more and more often. So for me, I immediately shift to having conversations with friends, especially other Black men, in terms of we hope that it is what we think it is. You start to think about the narrative, because normally when these things happen, it's never as clear and cut dry as we would like. You know, there's going to be some digging and some smearing and some trying to kill the credibility of the one who is deceased. And so our main thing was, now that we finally had some white brothers and sisters who were jumping on board, the solidarity seemed to be there. Celebrities, everyone was, running for Ahmad. We stand with Ahmad. We were like,
yep.
A friend of mine was saying, I hope nothing comes out of this that kills all that momentum. That they don't try to undercut all this. And so it's unfortunate that and I was telling him, it's unfortunate even as someone who may be the deceased or the one who gets murdered, we don't even have time to grieve. We went to PR mode, having a hope it's not what we thought it was because of the momentum. That's unfortunate. That's unfair to those of us who've been victimized so long that we still have to defend ourselves even in death.
Cool. Well, thank you, Theo. Any other comments before I kind of transition to another question?
Well, just to expand on this a little bit, because I posted, I ran with Ahmad this weekend on my Facebook page, and immediately got very strong reactions from my community, and not people I know closely, but people I know particularly from the South, who wrote immediately. And just because I expressed my support, my concern for the family, did exactly what Theo's talking about. Got to run this guy into the ground. He was in there casing the joint, or he was stealing, or he was whatever. And I just responded, even if I lived in an area where a lot of homes were under reconstruction for a while, and I used to wonder, we'd go into homes and just see the progress, just see what's going on. And if somebody wasn't comfortable with it, they might walk up and say, hey, what are you doing here? I said, just take a look at what they're doing. And it might be the homeowner or whatever. And I'd say, so we'd talk about it. But if I was Black, I probably wouldn't get the same response. And I think the problem is that if we can, I think the white community sometimes feel like if we can discredit him enough, we don't have to feel bad about it. And for some reason, we don't want to feel bad about it. There's got to be a reason. It's like when I learned to fly a plane as a child. One of the things they did was take us, every time there was a plane accident near us, all the pilots are around the hangar talking about had to be pilot error. Why? Because everyone wants to believe if you do everything right, this can't happen to you. And the fact is, even if you do everything right, and even if you don't, this is such a tragedy to have happen to yet another Black male. It's a tragedy now for these two white guys who thought they could. I mean, that Georgia has a law that you can take shotguns out and enforce whatever law you want to on your own. I mean, that's just anathema in California. It just wouldn't happen. You'd be in all kinds of trouble. So I've got a lot of white friends who say, technically, maybe there's no problem here. Everything looks good. I'm going, no, even if there's a tragedy that keeps happening because we treat each other differently. A white person going to that home, I have no doubt, would have been treated differently by these guys. And that's the larger issue we don't deal with. And we get down to litigating the facts of a case none of us know. We forget about the wider cultural divide that we've got to bridge. We've got to find a way to have us all treated the same. And that's an uphill swim. I get it. But I'm a voice for that among my folks. I got accused of being a race baiter from the mainstream media. It's what somebody accused me of. Just totally disappointed in you because I showed any support at all. Then I'm put in this box over here so I can be discredited. So they can kind of live in the safety of their own illusions. And I think that's what we've got to challenge the most. If I really thought my child was at risk from that, for people in the white community, you would have a different response to this than it's their children. And maybe they deserved it. And so I don't have to think about it.
Wayne, I think it boils down to, kind of a form of that cognitive dissonance. If you hold in your mind this idea that white people are generally good, law-abiding citizens and that their actions are always coming from a place of good, so when something evil happens, you have to try to rationalize it in your head. And what ends up happening is we blame the victim for that. And because we have to be able to reconcile those contradictory feelings in us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm sorry. And victim blaming, a lot of what Wayne just discussed, you're right. Everybody's right. There's a larger system of white supremacy in most systems in America. I don't know that we'll be the people to overturn those, but we can do it relationship to relationship. Race baiting, that word in general is probably a word that comes out of white supremacy. Victim shaming comes out of white supremacy, because at the foundational level of the United States of America, that is the thing that we are all combating, that most of the time we won't say it out loud, and I just did. That's the big thing we have to fight, that Wayne is talking about. We have to fight that. We were still fighting that, and that came right out of our history, from the absolute foundation.
I believe Lupe struck a chord with me when she said there's this cognitive dissonance.
Absolutely.
That we feel inherently that people of color are wrong and non-minorities are right. That is embedded into our culture and woven into our fabric. Lupe, you said it better than I can. And that's where I believe it begins. If I inherently feel that I'm better than you and that my moral standards, I was raised better than you, so anything you do that goes opposite of that or appears to, I'm going to blame you. So the cognitive dissonance and the solidarity that Bob or Wayne was talking about, now I can understand why. So thank you for articulating that.
Yeah.
Gil, I just wanted to say too, because you asked them about the Christian piece, and I struggle in my heart towards towards the men who did the shooting. To white supremacists, I don't have any compassion in my heart at all. I can't. I can't. It's a struggle. It's a real. It's a struggle.
Gotcha.
So you asked kind of for initial reactions, and I'll be super honest. I mean, for me, it was, I saw it, it came across, and I went, "There's another one. What can I actually do about that?" And so it's an exhaustion of these come through at whatever regularity they come through. Here's another one, and yeah, I mean, it's the cognitive dissonance, and it's the kind of, can I just wish this away and move on to thinking about something else, because I don't really feel like I can have an impact.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, so that makes some sense to me, because we start with, we have a president that lying comes very easily, and so we've gotten to a point where we just excuse that. And I don't mean to turn this political, but I mean, because we heard him say, I called Tim Cook Tim Apple to save time, and we all just kind of shake our heads and we think that's kind of cute, so we let it go. And then when something's really important, he's able to lay it down and get away with it. And we just expect it. And it happens with such frequency that we become overwhelmed as a culture. Like, well, there it is. Here he goes again. It's just the same thing. And what else would I expect, right? And so, Lauren, what you just said is this happens with such frequency that the risk is that we become numb to what happens. Well, here we go again.
Right.
Here's another one. And how is this different from the last one and the one before that and the one before that? So we're also fighting that reality within our culture, is that it's become commonplace, just like school shootings have become commonplace. We just kind of accept that it's part of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that when we're talking about the church, right, and you don't hear the church being in front of this, and I think Arnita said it best, and I think every pastor needs to hear that one line: racism is a sin. So if we're talking about church dealing with sin, they have to be in the front of this. They cannot be comfortable in this. And I think if we look at our history, this level of racism comes from a cellular level. So it's innate in us one way or the other, whether we want to deal with that or not. It's in us. But how do we deal with that? That's where the change comes. And I think with Wayne and Bob being so on the forefront and looking like what that racism looked like and speaking against it is where we start that change. And we can't be silent. And, you know, myself, like Keith, I see a lot of people in our community who's silent on both sides, right? Because they don't want to get in the middle of something where you're already in the middle of something. And I believe silence is in agreement. So those who are silent, especially our leaders, you're silent on this issue, you're in agreement. That is the only way to look at it. Pastors, if you are silent during this time, you're sinning. You're not against sin. So we really have to be honest and truthful in this uncomfortable conversation because it has to change. Now, a few things are going to happen. Either it's going to change for the better or it's going to change for the worse, but there is going to be a shift.
Hey, Nick, you had something. I'm unmuting you. I'm trying to unmute you. I can't unmute you.
I got it. Thanks, Bob. I think her name is a She Power. I think you're saying. I think you're totally correct in terms of the church. In terms of the church taking the lead on this. I think as Christians, I'm a Christian, and as Christians, I think when we see an injustice, we see a sin. I think, like you said, like sitting on our hands, not doing anything about it, not talking about it, is kind of like it hits me like all lives matter. It hits me like just like a blanket. Like, let me be silent about this. Let me not be controversial. This isn't a sin issue. This isn't a gospel issue. But I mean, Jesus talks about this all the time in the Bible. He talks about social injustice all the time. And I live in California, and you know, I've been talking about this about racial injustice in church for a long time. And I live in a small city, a smaller-ish city in California, and I asked a bunch of pastors, a bunch of leaders, I looked at to see, are they going to even mention his name, Ahmaud Arbery? Are they even going to just pray for his mom, right? On Mother's Day. I challenged some of the leaders, and I was happy that my church actually we're in a series right now, and we paused our series to talk about social injustice. We have one Black pastor on staff. My church is predominantly all white. We're trying very hard to be multicultural. Like we're actively trying, which is good. But we actually on stage talked about, you know, social injustice, racial reconciliation in the church. But I'm pretty sure we were the only church. I'm almost 100% sure we were the only church to even mention Ahmaud Arbery's name on Sunday, and that's kind of my issue. Like we talked about how like these things happen over and over again. And my issue with like the church and these issues is that, you know, I'm hurting, right? I see a Black man killed in the streets. Everyone's talking about it on social media. Everyone's talking about it out in the streets. Everyone's talking about it except for the church. Like literally, like I walk into my church, it's like it didn't happen. It didn't exist. Everyone's hugging and high-fiving, and I'm like, I'm in pain. And unfortunately, you know, there's only like 3 Black guys in my entire church, so I'm in pain. I'm struggling, and you know, the pastor, you know, those fake jokes. How's the church doing this morning? You know, woo. No, I said, how you doing, saints? And it's just for me, like I'm torn. And that's the issue I have, is that like we can talk about so many other topics, right? We talk about abortion, we can talk about and the topics we should talk about, but when it comes to racial reconciliation or racism in the church, especially in predominantly white churches and some Black churches, we just don't go there. And as a Christian, as a Christ follower, as someone who loves Jesus, and I'm hurting, and I look for comfort from other Christians, other saints. When I go into my church and it's almost like they know what's happening and they just don't want. It's like they're refusing to talk about it. Like that infuriates me.
Wow. Well, let me shift things a bit, because about a week or two prior to this whole big story breaking out, there was because of course we're in this COVID-19 pandemic. In the state of Michigan, there was a huge outcry an outcry that led a number of people to go to the state capital of Michigan with automatic rifles, mostly white men, and demanded answers, demanded freedom to not have to comply with some of the COVID, some of the social distancing, and some of the directives that were put in place by the governor and lawmakers. In that whole construct, a lot of those people represented conservative ideals, much of which is embraced by many Christians. How do you see that confusing maybe the message that's supposed to be coming from the church? Kind of piggybacking a little bit of what Nick said, a little bit of what's, is it Arlena?
Arlena.
Arlena.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna call you She Power.
That's
that's
good
what's on
too.
here. That's yeah. But some of the comments that were said, how is the church's message maybe being either watered down, mixed, confused by its lack of stepping up and addressing these things, and how has that affected you in particular? And I'll start with the authors in answering that question, and then I'll go to some of the other panelists.
I will jump in. I'm going to jump in because I do a podcast, a semi-regular podcast with a Muslim leader in my area called A Christian and a Muslim Walk Into a Studio. And and ironically, his name is Ahmad. So I asked him during a podcast, what would that have looked like in Michigan if you were in your ceremonial robes with other people carrying weapons and marching up to the Capitol? And he said, Bob, I would have been shot. We would have been killed. And then we discussed what would it have looked like if those protesters had been black. And there is no doubt that this would have had a different result. And this is where I have to come into agreement with my friend Arnita, who told me, by the way, not to be a crazy white person today. Just FYI for everybody in the room.
She said, just put me on blast. It's all right, though.
This is not the day to be a crazy white person.
Be crazy, Bob.
Wait till I come to Bakersfield.
Oh, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I am a crazy person. And so, I can't help but be me. But that would have been a completely different outcome had it been anyone other than white. And Arnita, Arnita and I have gone back and forth on white privilege versus white advantage. And we've even had pretty good arguments about it. That's white privilege at its best. Guys strapping themselves with weapons and walking to a state capitol, right into a state capitol. That is privilege at its best.
I'm sure Wayne may have more to say on this than I do. This is what I'll say. I had the same discussion that you have with Ahmad, Bob, with some of my friends. And we knew if the ethnicity and race of the people had been shifted, there would have been bloodshed on that day. This again is another indicator of how whiteness is centered in the United States of America. That's the big topic. And I'm not really versed in political science and all of that, but that is the bigger problem that we have here. I have a husband who runs multi-unit restaurants, and I watch week one, people lose jobs, incomes be cut 40 to 60%. I watched all that, but I don't encourage Mike to go and hijack the Capitol. I just don't. We're not going to break the law. We're going to try to contend with it. So when you see people who just say, I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. And this is why I don't have to do that. The Constitution says I don't have to do it. I don't understand individual rights when they just violate governmental and all the other rights. I just don't understand it. To me, that is quintessential privilege. So I'll pass it to Wayne.
Oh, just, yeah, people could get their arms around that. That would be very, very helpful, particularly people from my community. I think what's difficult about the question, Gil, is that when you say the church in America, it bleeds 100 different colors, right? So there are congregations that are very much involved in these kinds of things. And by that other group that you're mentioning, if you take guns to the Capitol, that group regards that group over there as not really part of the church, because they're woke and they're just given over to mainstream media and progressive politics. And even in this conversation, I'm afraid we're talking about white supremacy, which I'm comfortable talking about it, but I've got friends that aren't. They close their eyes. There's no white supremacy. Everybody has equal rights, which isn't true, but they think it's true. You've got people who are afraid. And really, there's a group of white evangelicals that, and I've heard him say it, we're the most persecuted group in this country. And so when Arnita says something about white privilege, they just go, what is she talking about? Man, it'd be better to be a black person in America, because now you have all these things that are helpful to you in the culture. And it's just, what I'm concerned about is that we don't divide into these two camps, because in this other camp over here of these white evangelicals, there's a lot of good-hearted people there who've just been manipulated into this racial bias, and they don't even see it. Like, one wrote to me over the post I did and said, this thing in Georgia had no racial overtones at all. It wasn't about race.
Goodness.
It was about a lawbreaker and trying to enforce the law. And I'm going, how can you be so blind? How can you? But that's the group we've got to talk to. And if it just people hear this and go, okay, that's all those progressive, that mainstream media crowd talking about,
right.
It's not that. I have my relationship with Arnita and some other friends that I have in the world that are African Americans. I mean, I have moved light years in the last 10 years, 5 years on my journey of really appreciating what African American people go through in my culture. I know other people who need that same journey. Yeah. And I'm afraid when we divide into camps so quickly and criticize so completely, we alienate actually people that could go on a very good learning journey. And I hope that's what Language of Healing offers people. Yeah. Say, yeah, I don't feel threatened by that. You know, as a lawbreaker in Georgia, man, they should have got that guy. To hold it a minute. Even if he was casing the joint, he didn't take anything. You want people dying for that? And it just, unfortunately, these guys with the guns, and Georgia law allows a situation to be created where everybody felt threatened. And the people with the guns win. And like you say, white people, that's the ultimate of white supremacy, is white people can carry guns unchallenged. But if a black person carries guns to the state capitol, it's not going to go unchallenged. If a white guy comes out of that house, he's probably not going to be challenged in the same way as Ahmaud was. And I hope this kind of thing, we've got a pretty good group here of people that are passionate about this thing. And we've got to find a way to communicate with that other group of people that could be invited to a better journey. Because if we don't convince them, we're going to end up having the same fight over and over again. This side saying there's racism, this side saying, well, colorblind, color doesn't matter. And then we never get a chance to talk about what it is that we could do. Because I would love to hear from some of you, what can the majority culture do to make y'all feel safer? And I think about what Black children have to be taught about moving in society, so not to threaten the cops or other people. I go, never had that talk with my child, never felt the need to have that talk with my child. Yeah. And so it's important for us to actually find ways to connect and not just put people in boxes, and then learn from each other, because that's what's moved my journey. And I hope it's what moves other people's journey too.
Good.
Could Arnita say that one thing she said about something before understanding? Like once.
Well, you can never bring healing to what you don't understand. And so part of what we need corporately and compositely in America is to try to find better levels of understanding. Now, as the young man said, I expect my Christian brothers and sisters to be able to do that a little quicker. Now, I understand people coming in to the body of Christ and having to have their mind renewed and having to have generational inequities dealt with. I understand all that. But at the very core, I expect you to understand a little bit more of what I'm going through. But what I find is that the sociological constraints that we have, wherever people are, their sociology and those constraints come into the building. I agree with Wayne. There's got to be a way for us to have those conversations. But I also know in reality, as a person who has placed myself as a stark minority in a church, there has to be first awareness and desire that I need to have a conversation to understand. And that, in my opinion, where the void is.
Yeah.
Some
So
people
where,
desire it, a lot of people don't.
But this is interesting too, though, because it goes back to that race, racial inequities are that's a sin, right? And we talk about that as sin. We should be talking about that as sin in the church, in the same way that we would see in churches where they attack, for example, other sinful, activities or whatever else it might be. That's at the forefront. But why is this not at the forefront, right? We can say, okay, we challenge, fill in the blank of sin, sexual sin, things like that. We hear that from the pulpit almost every week. Yet when you step into a church, how often, why aren't there more conversations about this? I mean, it seems, one of the last, and I'm a I don't know what you'd call me, a former minister that doesn't really know where I am anymore. But one of the last sermons that I gave was after Dylan Roof shot up the AME church, right? And I remember specifically being told that I cannot touch the topic, that I cannot talk about it, I cannot bring race into the conversation. That was my last sermon. I decided to go against it because I couldn't get fired. But why are we scared? Again, partly this goes back to the stuff that Wayne and Bob are talking about, that they have immediate friends who have automatically said, once you put this up, they're just like, snap, this is, you're not seeing it clearly, or I have a differing view. And I think the church is afraid to talk about subjects that are going to sort of disrupt the status quo. And that's, what is the church doing if it's not disrupting the status quo, right? I mean, isn't this the point of the whole message of Jesus? Isn't this the whole point of the prophetic voices in the Hebrew Bible? And if the church isn't a voice against the status quo, then what really is it doing? So it threatens people. It threatens people who have the power. It threatens people who have the money. And I think for churches, this is at the core of it. And if pastors are scared of that, then they're in the wrong profession and they worship the wrong God.
Professor Lamas, can we, when we have these discussions about race, can we at least start with the Imago Dei, that we're all made in the image of God, and let that be foundational to the discussion? Because if we're all made in the image of God as Christians, this whole issue would go away, because there is a value that I view you as the image of God, no matter what race. So why can't we start there as a beginning toward this healing, that, hey, black, white, blue, purple, brown, yellow, we are all made in his image? Can the church start there, Professor Lamas? Yeah,
I mean, I think it should, really. I mean, honestly, this is where, at that point, once we have value placed in people, then, value is what really gives us the ability to say, how much somebody is actually worth. And so,
right.
That's certainly, that's the place to start. I think that even in the stories of creation, right? Once you have, for example, I mean, I think you look at even Babel, right? By the time you get to chapter 9, we're pretty much already starting to see people dividing, right? It talks about languages being split and all this stuff. And part of God's task in that whole story, in the Babel story, is that, chapter 11, is that God is saying, no, we're not trying to be the same, right? We're trying to be different. This is like a God-given sort of thing. It talks about how people are coming together to make one language, and they have this sort of, again, the way I read the story is a sort of power grab, but God going, oh no, we're going to disperse this. We like different cultures. We like different peoples. And so again, this is an important discussion from Genesis to Revelation, which Revelation talks about when you have this summing up of the entire universe, the entire cosmos, right? what you end up seeing is that, and I wrote this down here because this is a really, I mean, obviously this is one we should all know, but when it's talking about that it's for every tribe, every language, every people, and every nation. I mean, this is at the core, right? Of from the beginning to the end, it's a healing of people who took God's mission, wrecked it, and God redeemed it, right? That's the story of the Bible.
Well, it's so
And here,
funny you say that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, but Wayne.
I was going to say, here's the problem, Keith, with what you suggested. And that is, I think everybody I know would give lip service to what you just said. I don't think that'd be controversial anywhere on the planet. To say we're all made in God's image, black, white, we sing songs as little kids in Sunday school about it. But it's the application of that that gets completely lost. So we would be fine talking about it in that broad stroke. But to realize where I have priority and others have less value, somebody gave me an illustration today that was brilliant. It's like blue dye in water. You can see it, you know it's there, but how do you get it out? How do you get the dye out of the water? And that's the challenge, because it is the racism that's in our world and in Christianity, in white Christianity in America. It's there. Most people don't even want to see it because it's just always been, and they just want to believe we're all colorblind. If we just be colorblind, everything will be fine. How do we see it, call it, name it, talk about it, find some resolutions? And I don't know that institutionally we're ready to talk about it. I think most institutions are scared to death. It'll change the makeup of their planet and income if they do. But I can, in my life, when I'm sitting talking to white people who I think are racist or go off on Colin Kaepernick or whatever, I don't mind calling them out. I don't mean being busy. I'm trying to find a way into, I want you to think more broadly about this because I think you're really uninformed as to what's going on. And then at some point, you just ask me, do you have a real close African-American friend? And they'll look at me and say, well, I have friends. I say, no, I mean a close friend. So someone who hurt because a boy got shot because they have a boy, similar age to the one that was shot down in Georgia. That's their son, their child. Do you like, oh, well, no, I don't know anybody like that. I'm going, that's the problem. Because if you did, you feel it. I felt what I felt in that story of people I know knowing what they felt. That's what I felt.
Yeah, I think that's the key is moving beyond the. I'm not saying that we shouldn't address institutional and broader issues, but really when it comes down to getting to know people and uniting your hearts with people that you know are hurt. So even if let's say that tomorrow it comes out that Aubrey was a terrible guy and all this stuff comes out and in this case in particular the white guys were okay. I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying let's say what if as a white man. I think it's important for me to realize that and to have relationships with people that I know that this hurt them and that it causes fear. And I'm a white man with a black son and a black daughter. And so I think about this very differently. And I'm also a Southern, I live in Atlanta and my instincts are kind of conservative. And so I have to challenge my thinking a lot. And but what's changed my life and my thinking on race, and I think I was probably I would have been pretty progressive before, but what changed it was getting to know, not just getting to know, but building true friendships with young African-American men living in at-risk neighborhoods in Atlanta, listening to them and not agreeing with everything that they thought and believed, but recognizing that from their perspective, there was genuine pain and fear living. And so I saw part of my role to help them to see things maybe a little bit differently, and also for me to see things differently. But also that because of my son is not officially my son. We have this weird, it's a long, complicated story, but I kind of share custody with his birth father, who lives in Atlanta. And so I go down and pick him up and every other weekend, and he spends a lot of time with me, and they refer to me as daddy and all this weird stuff. But so me becoming not just knowing or having a friend who's black, but having a family that's black. And my family and my son's birth family, we are family now. And so for me, the initial response wasn't what's right or what's wrong, or I didn't even think broadly about racism in America or anything, all the big things. I thought about my boy, and I thought about my family who was going to be hurting, and this would sow fear in their hearts. And that's, to me, that's where we need to begin, because that's just what I tell people, is when you get to know people, you'll fall in love with them, and you'll think about things differently. Or maybe you still hold the same positions you hold, but you'll hold those positions very differently. You don't have to, you don't have to change you don't have to become a liberal Democrat, or you don't have to become a conservative Republican, or you don't have to do any of these things. Just get to know people and fall in love with them. And you may not change what you believe, but you'll change how you hold those beliefs very differently, and you'll be a lot looser ideas. And your first instinct will not go to the political elements of this, but it will go to the people that you know that will be hurt. And if that alone doesn't move us to do something differently, I don't know what else will. And I'll just add this from my perspective, and that, I know a lot of pastors, because I was in the ministry for a long time. On Facebook, I think almost every pastor I know, and I know a lot, posted something about this case, and posted about their anger and how wrong this was America and the things we needed to address. I don't know if that encourages anybody in this meeting, but I think just about, and all of them except for one were white pastors leading suburban churches. And so that was my experience with this particular case.
Good.
That's great.
I think when we talk about religion, sorry about that, Bob.
Sorry, Arlena.
Just because they're in the church does not mean they have the right stance. We have a minister here locally who's a Black man, who's going around talking about the fact that this situation was not because of race. And he's speaking to the exact opposite of what most Americans believe about this situation. And this person is dragged around many interviews to speak on behalf of the Black community, and his views is so far opposite than most anyone that I know that looks like me in this situation. So, those sometimes who are willing to speak up and be a voice is not the right voice. And it's almost anything that happens that's negative in the Black community, he's the voice that they go to because it's comfortable and it's safe for them and it's in agreement with them. And so it's definitely a disservice to us. So when we talk about pastors, we can't give them all the responsibility in this area because all do not qualify.
Yeah, Arlene, absolutely correct. He is the voice of the opposite. We found a Black guy who agrees with us. See? We found one. They'll trot him out like they trotted Candace Owens out here as well, to make folk feel comfortable and emboldened in their racism and bigotry. So it's sad, it's awful. Mrs. Waller and I, we've had this conversation, and I get angry. Bob knows that I want to sequester him in a legal way. But we're all loving Christians here. But again, they always find someone to trot out. They always find one to say, look, there he is. See, now there you go. Yeah. But there's got to be more voices like that to drown out. Not that he doesn't have the right to speak. Don't get me wrong. He does have the right to speak. But there needs to be, let's hear the opposite to that tonality.
Jesus, he got upset in the temple. And I'm going to finish my point and then I'll be done. One of the things that Wayne said that is important, he said white Christianity, but Wayne, I think it's also Black Christianity responsibility as well. Because if our pastors are not leading this conversation and being in the front of the conversation, then we can't put the whole weight on white pastor's shoulder. It is not realistic and it is unfair, and we're not going to have the impact we need if we don't do it together. And this is where we come together, in the arms of Jesus, all of us together, speaking collectively as you are doing on this kind of platform. So I just wanted to say that I do agree with you, but I think we need to take it a step further. We have to have some of this responsibility too.
Oh yeah, I'm just not going to speak for Black Christianity.
But we're speaking for you, so speak
That's
for us,
great.
brother.
Yeah,
It's okay.
Go ahead.
Theo,
You're
go
gonna say
ahead.
something, Theo. Yeah, Theo.
Well, interestingly, just the language, when we start talking about white Christianity, black Christianity, then we, unbeknownst, find ourselves adding to the problem because now we've made this Christ-centered thing racially centered. So if it's black Christianity or white Christianity or Asian Christianity or conservative or liberal, all of a sudden now we're getting non-Christ centered. It should just be Christ centered Christianity. But just going back to maybe 20 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, the topic of understanding, because I think that's very important. And one of my spiritual fathers once told me that you can never truly understand unless you're willing to stand under. And how it's important that oftentimes we want to overstand. We want to keep our lofty position, and we ask questions of someone, but we're really not open to what they give us. But the biblical example we see of Jesus, he made himself low. He made himself a servant. And he told his disciples that this will be the new commandment: love each other as I have loved you, so prefer the other. And so I think preferring the other is vital to understanding. You can't prefer yourself over someone else and truly understand, because you're still going to go into that conversation holding yourself in this lofty position. And so I think it's important that whether you're black or white or male or female, any relationship we're in, are we preferring that other to ourselves? And not in this way that's detrimental to ourselves. So I'm not talking about low as me, I'm dirt, and you're all that. But as Buber said, with the I and thou, can you see yourself as someone worthy, someone fully should be respected, but also see that in someone else? Mm-hmm. If we can do that, I think collectively, then we can start to have a collective power that we can use to eventually speak out against systemic oppression and the powers that be. But it has to start relationally.
I think
I want to double back on Wayne's question, because he asked, what can we as minorities say to a majority culture about how to have some strategy, for lack of a better word, against some of the things. And this is what I'll leave. Wayne has a lovely daughter, Julie. She's lovely, and I've met her. And Wayne has a grandson, Austin. And Austin's just as cute as he wants to be. But for your family, Wayne, I want you to make sure, and this is not even on the table. This is not even on the table. I'm just using you as an example. I want white mommies to tell their white sons, you can't kill people because they're black. I'm tired of having to always have my sons adjust. I want that to come out of your race's value stream for the goodness of humanity. It starts at home. This stuff starts at home. So instead of saying, well, you got to tell them 15 things so they come home. No, I want white men to say, don't kill black people because they're black. Just don't. That's just a start. I mean, that probably is not really educational. That doesn't sound real plush. It's just really hard. Okay, well, you just can't kill people because they have different color skin. Should be a value, but it's not, obviously. It's not. So
it's not.
Obviously, it's not.
Can I ask a question going back to Theo by any chance? I was curious about his you had talked about this division of black Christianity being a separator in the church. I am curious because I don't think that this label even of black Christianity was birthed out of preference, but rather out of necessity, right? I think it was birthed out of this understanding of being, I guess, not taken and respected. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out if this is actually a negative thing that we separate this out. For me, I think it's more of an understanding that Black folks understand more clearly the actual trajectory of the church in its earliest place. That Christianity and even Islam are birthed out of really out of persecution. And there's this misunderstanding that I just don't think the churches understand anymore that they are part of religions that literally are have their origins in persecution, in being the minorities within the society, and don't respond in that way. So the only part I'm just questioning is whether it actually, by separating it out, it actually divides, the church. I think Black folks have just a better understanding of what the church actually is, to be honest, because they feel the same sort of persecution that the earliest Christians, the earliest Muslims felt. I mean, I don't know. That's just I'm just curious.
Well, I would say I wish I could say thank you for that flattering compliment that Blacks have a better understanding, but I think once again that wouldn't be true across the board. One of my white pastors who I value dearly was just showing me some post of a local Black pastor who was just way off the rails in regards to saying that he was the one who could only hear from God. He's the one who knows the truth. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where it gets danger. And I understand it's rooted in our necessity. But once sin enters into the picture, which was very on, even the things that may come out of necessity, we still got to question those things also. And so I'm not questioning why it came about. I'm not questioning if it's divisive, but sooner or later, if we make everything Black, white, or Asian, or this, it does defeat the ultimate purpose of what we're trying to get to. Regardless of if it was birthed with good intentions, there's a lot of good movements that are birthed with intentions. Mm-hmm. Whenever you have people involved, and we're all fallible, those intentions can really get skewed, because then we can start to elevate. We push back on supremacy, and then we end up pushing down on supremacy to the point that we elevate ourselves. And all of a sudden now we see ourselves in a supremacy in some manner. So I think we're just having to just say guard against that we don't want power to then exercise that power and be oppressive, or divide.
And I would say that's where Christianity was oppressed in its earliest form, and then eventually gained the power after Constantine, right? After it becomes a Roman religion, it gains its power, and then it starts persecuting other people for not believing like it. So I think but I would say for Black folks, they haven't reached a point where they've come to a point of power yet.
I agree.
They haven't, and when they do, then we can have that conversation.
I agree. That's true.
Well, let me say this, and let me maybe bring this to a nice bow, because I do want to respect time, and I think we were supposed to be trying to keep this within the hour. So is that okay? I don't know. I just want to make sure.
Good luck.
I've got time.
Yeah, I know. Good luck with that.
We're past an hour by now.
We're way past an hour. However, I think Theo maybe I think you both make a great point, but I want to come back to something that Wayne said. When you reference the Black church, the white church, I think the goal of the book, Language of Healing, was that conversations would be had. And so sometimes I think what I hear Theo saying is that we can tend to overcompensate. And for example, I may start having conversations with some of my white brothers and sisters, and what I want is for understanding to happen. What I don't want is for white people to walk away with this tremendous amount of guilt and feel helpless and hopeless. That's not my goal. My goal is for understanding, so that we see that, so that at the end of the day, Arnita can say, like as Arnita said, no one walks away thinking that a Black life is worth less than a white life. Whether you're a police officer, whether you're a judge, whether you're a teacher, because these roles, it's not just happening in law enforcement, it's happening in the educational system, it's happening all over, it's happening in churches. And so maybe the reason why people aren't speaking up about it in their pulpits, or why they're not mentioning it, is because there's a different value. When I first met Wayne, we've met years ago, and it was about the whole Trump statements regarding Kaepernick at the time. And I had been a long-time listener of a podcast that Wayne and Brad had done back years ago called The God Journey, and still going on. And I had listened for years, and the issue of race never ever came up. And then once it did, I was like, this is what we're talking about? So they had me on, we talked about it. And I said that if you go into a traditionally tracked Black,
Oh no, we've lost Gil.
Gil.
We've lost our moderator.
Where did he go from
you
here?
cut him off, Bob?
Lost you, Gil.
Bob, you didn't cut him off, did you? Come on.
I did not. He's
Oh
frozen.
man,
He is
he's
frozen.
frozen.
He's intense, though. I like the intensity.
But Wayne, why don't you fill in the blank, because he said he then appeared on your podcast. Can you finish the story?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had a friend out of North Carolina. Oh, he's back. No, he's not.
No, he left.
Okay. Oh, he left. He's going to sign back in. I had a friend on from North Carolina who was talking about some of the racial experience as a Black man. But he said on my podcast, I've never experienced racism. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've got the wrong guy on here. And so we talked about other things, but then I got stuff from Gil and from other people say, yeah. No, I know. I was even trying to take him back going, nah, come on. Now I've got friends that would, oh, no. And so his story is very different, which is great to hear. We don't always have the same stories. But that's what started with Gil and I getting together on a podcast to kind of help unpack it from his perspective of race, which was very different from Vince's.
Can I jump in on one thing, because something that you said, Wayne, and Arnita, you alluded to it as well, is proximity. Just being around people who are not exactly like us. And I just had this conversation with someone this morning in a different context. The gospel story is at its heart a story of proximity. We've got God entering our world to be with us. It's phenomenal when you take that in, that it's all about proximity. Then we find Jesus, approaching the woman at the well, and all of the things that he did that were kind of out of bounds. Proximity is everything. And if we're going to take anything away, from where I sit, it's very difficult to have hatred for people you know.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's just really difficult.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or to devalue people,
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know where we want to jump off this thing. I'm sure we're just scratching the surface of things, because we're issue kind of bouncing over stuff. Yeah. I wonder if there'd be value in this group hanging out together every couple of weeks for an hour, just to see what we would learn over time, what we could explore, because I'm really enjoying a lot of what I'm hearing. But I know, we're just each talking from our perspective. I'd love to see how would a consensus among this group, if we found one, could give us some insight as to some of those strategies to live differently in the world and encourage others to.
Wayne, can I ask a question?
No,
Lauren. Well, Lauren, real quick. I mean, Lauren brought up that feeling of powerlessness. I'm wondering, and he tried to talk a second ago, but Lauren, I was wondering how you feel about your powerlessness after just this conversation. Just curious.
I mean, I don't know, for me that it changes that picture. I mean, it's helpful to have the perspective. Several people have talked about proximity. I think Wayne mentioned the thing of, Black families teaching their kids what they need to do to stay safe. I didn't even know until 5 years ago that was a thing. And one of my coworkers was mentioning it. I thought he was joking. And he's like, no, this is a real thing that I teach my kids. So I think absolutely having this helps with the perspective. I think I still find myself sitting here and going, okay, I'm looking at 11 other faces. How do we change 300 million people? Right?
Lauren, there's a thing called the power of one.
One at a time, Lauren.
Yeah.
One at a
One
time.
person to empower one person, and then that spreads out wide. That's how that happens. You have all the power. We all do, but it happens one at a time.
One at a time.
Yeah,
And
I would say.
I often have people. I was on a podcast yesterday, and someone said, "Now, how did the book come about?" And I thought, well, it's kind of interesting. The book just came about because I met Wayne and diffused something in a room, and he kind of thought I was a rock star. And
let's not overstate it now, Arnett.
It kind of went from there. But it's always interesting because I tell people I probably have 4 or 5 books in me if you can pull them out. But this book would not have been on my to-do list. And let me tell you why. Because as an African American woman who is absolutely called divinely by God to diversify the house of God, I know that. I have talked till I was blue in my little brown face about this. And I see very little movement toward change. So of all things in the world, I would have thought I would talk through the opportunity to talk through this with two white men, older white men. I knew that was God. Well, a little older. Come on, bro. You're a little more seasoned. That's all. A little more seasoned.
Man, you're killing me.
That's all. My point is generationally. To speak with two white men about race, that doesn't happen much.
That's right.
It just doesn't happen much. As a minority, the last person I'm probably going to talk to about race is a white man in the world, ever. We just don't do that. So I know that it was divinely given, but that proximity for me, which went on my radar, I'm so grateful for it. It changed the way I saw things. Let me tell you one way it really softened me, even though I kind of knew it confirmed it. Often, people who have white skin in our lives, they really just haven't talked to us. They do not understand our cultural suffering, our trauma. They haven't heard our stories. I tell the book is anecdotally written and in conversation for a reason. I just tell my stories. I tell my stories about my husband walking in the neighborhood and the police being called. It's just stories, but we had to get close enough to do it. So that's what I hope the book will do. The very unlikely person that you think you're going to have this conversation with, I just pray that God opens the door for you to have it, because it's not going to be something you're going to plan, because we didn't plan this. And I think Bob and Wayne would agree.
Yeah, I would. I think in terms of conversation, I mean, Bob is he's a local favorite in Bakersfield. He has a spot in Bakersfield where he walks in at Panera Bread. I'm telling you secrets, Bob, and they just give him a cup. They already know Bob's here to have a conversation with just different people and of all walks of life and different skin tones and different sexuality. I mean, just different than him. And I think that's important. I think having these conversations, I think, are vital, and to seek out people who don't look like you or who don't think like you or even have different political affiliation, I think is important. Even with me, I purposely will set up meetings with police officers in Bakersfield and I want to have these one-on-one conversations with them. I think what Jimmy was saying about just having like these personal relationship and understanding, right? Just be like, hey, this is where I'm coming from. I think that's a good start. In our churches, in my church, I'm trying to get together the 8 minorities we have in the entire church to go up to our pastors, our white leaders, and like tell them how we're feeling. Tell them how we're trying to be multicultural. Okay, the people who are multicultural in the church, do we feel represented? Do we feel like we're being heard? Like having these one-on-one conversations, listening to other podcasts, just kind of informing yourself and just taking it, just having conversations with different people, having forums like this.
And helping them understand, I'm not trying to be divisive. I'm not trying to disrupt unity here.
Right.
I just want you to hear my heart, and just being able to do that. I've done that before. Sometimes it worked and other times it didn't. Right. But it's still true to who you are. Mm-hmm. And so, just say, I just want to talk to you about my heart, which a pastor should be able to hold your heart.
Right.
If not, he shouldn't be your pastor. He or she shouldn't be your pastor. Yeah. But I'll just leave that right there.
He just dropped a bomb.
I'm about to get some popcorn now.
Hey, Gilbert is back.
He's back.
Oh, hey, boss.
Hey there.
Nick just shared something that I think that that white pastors need to learn. when I think back to the 90s, there was during the Promise Keepers movement, there was a big push toward racial reconciliation. And what came out of that, it seemed like a lot of churches wanted to become more diverse. And so white churches, suburban churches would hire an African-American pastor and make them the, some sort of phrase, basically, make us diverse pastor. And that didn't seem to work. And I think what we missed there is that unless white people are willing to surrender power, as long as you're in a structure where you've hired somebody to do something, then you can fire somebody when it's not happening. But when we are willing to give up power and all that it means, not just in churches, but that's when we can truly start to understand what it means to be one. And that's what Jesus did, and what Jesus taught us when he prayed. Before he prayed that we would all be one, he began that whole scene by washing feet and by surrendering his rights to serve one another. And I mean, that's a big step. And then, unless someone's really living loved by God, they're not going to surrender power. And so I happened to be at a suburban church in Atlanta that was a historically white church. And the last pastor they hired was an African-American pastor to pastor a white church. And it's become a lot more racially diverse because of that. And I think that's a big key, that you can't hire toward diversity. You have to surrender and love and give away power. And that's something I think we miss in our culture, because it's scary to give away power.
Oh, I think you hit the nail right on the head.
This is the story of Jesus, right?
I agree. Yeah, you did.
I mean, the stories of Jesus, he steps into a situation, and he's standing before a big crowd, right, who are watching this thing take place, and Jesus displaces his own power that he has as the teacher, as the leader. He gives it to the individual, who then is re-empowered and then brought back into the community. I mean, this is what it's all about, displacement of power. Take it out of yourself, give it away.
And so that's why our system has not been changed, because that's the power. And until that is challenged and changed, we'll continue having these conversations. Even though our heart's in the right place, we've got to diversify that power. And I think, Jimmy, you hit that. That's really where we have to create the change.
And I don't know if the Black people in this room can appreciate, I know you can appreciate, but understand or recognize, I don't think I realized it, that most white people have never been in a room when they're the only white person.
You think?
And so,
I know that's the truth.
They don't even realize that they've never been in that room. And so I have been lots of times. And so until you're in that room, when you're the only one, or you're in a room where you don't have any power at all, socially or legitimate power, anything like that, you don't appreciate what the experience of a Black person is. And I try to tell my friends that all the time when these issues come up. It's like, you don't know, because you haven't had to. And we're able to live in a way that you don't have to be. Black people don't have the choice. Black people don't have the choice not to be in those rooms. Eventually, you're going to have to be in those rooms, and white people can live their life and never have to be in that room. And that's not that. A lot of times, that's just ignorant. It's not a willful. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's just the way we've structured our lives. That it's not. You have to be intentional about being in those rooms, and that's a tough place to be.
Absolutely.
I think we could look at the way of, who's protesting right now. It's been a long time since everyone has been on the same playing field. The coronavirus has taken all the power away, right? So I think we can look, and we've seen they're literally going crazy and protesting. We don't care what the risk is. We want what we want. And so we have to start those conversations from that space.
Yeah,
I think that's
exactly.
a great observation, that I often get excited whenever something happens in the world that allows those who normally would not understand to start to understand. I think about some of the conversations that were going on in higher ed in terms of some of the financial struggles, and it was causing cuts and things of that nature, and people were frantic about losing their jobs and the instability. And I was kind of like, well, now when we have these faculty meetings, you know, you get a sense of what I feel as African American faculty here. You know, and the light bulb goes off, because if you're trying to have someone racially get that understanding, it's not going to happen. But if there's something analogous, and you rope them in, they say yeah, and then you connect the dots. They're like, oh, you set me up. I was like, but not welcome to our world. Welcome to our world, you know.
Yeah, I have a quick question. I know we're 30 minutes over the hour. This kind of goes back to Gilbert's question before he got cut off.
Please call me Gil.
Gil, sorry. It was a while ago about just the guns, right, and just the storming of the state building. So for me, my biggest, I think, I don't want to say anxiety, but my biggest kind of like, I'm kind of holding my breath, is the sentencing of these two men who killed Ahmaud Arbery. And I'm talking to my family and talking to some other African American people. We've seen this before, over and over and over again. The most recent one I can remember is Amber Geiger, where she killed Botham Jean.
Oh my goodness.
And she got 10 years. And a lot of African American people, including myself, I believe she'll probably serve about 5, honestly. And so my question is, if these two men don't get the fair sentence, or even if they get off, as Christians, I mean, because to be honest with you guys, I've never owned a gun. I've never been shot a gun. I've held a gun before. And growing up, my dad was he was in the Marines, and so we had guns in the house. I didn't even know we had guns, but I struggle with maybe, like, I don't know what else to do. Like, I don't know if I should be armed. I don't know. I've never carried ever. I've never looked at, like, owning a gun. But a lot of Black people are really they're saying, there might be riots. There might be the Rodney King incident. I mean, as Christians, what do you guys think about the sentencing? Because these two guys got arrested. George Zimmerman got arrested. I mean, of course they got arrested, but the sentencing is what we're trying to kind of navigate, and that's why I'm kind of holding my breath. And I'm honestly a little nervous about it, about the sentencing. Do you guys any ideas?
Nick, I'm with you on that. I didn't applaud when those gentlemen were arrested. They're supposed to be arrested. Why am I going to applaud you for something that should be done? I'm more concerned about what this verdict can be. If they are found not guilty, which does not make you innocent, but not guilty, what will be the result and the retort and the response of the people of color in this country? That's where I'm at, because I believe Black people now, just like after Rodney King, there is this combustion, there is this undergirding, there is this anger, there's this frustration. The people that are tell us the law to be law and abiding, well, they storm a Capitol. Well, they're not being law and abiding. Wait, there's a double standard here that I'm sensing. So I'm just concerned. Yes, I didn't applaud when those gentlemen were. You're supposed to be arrested and the fact that this was covered for 2 months. So my faith in the judicial system is little to none. So if these gentlemen are found innocent or not guilty, I'm concerned about the people of color. What will our response be? Because my daughters asked me this. She says, Daddy, why do we always got to do all the forgiving?
Exactly.
So I didn't know how to answer that question.
Exactly.
That question threw me for a loop. How come we always got to be sorry?
Always.
How come this is always our fault? Why aren't we always guilty, then presumed innocent? What do you tell young women, young adult? Somebody answer that question for me.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
I mean, the truth of the matter is, we're on a very public platform, but we know how within the Black community, we're going to have some very real conversations that we've probably had those kind of conversations around the dinner table. When COVID ends, it's going to be in a barbershop. It's going to be in a beauty salon. And, there's going to be some things we talk about here, and there's going to be some other conversations we have around a dinner table. And these are very real concerns. So now I remember when the whole thing happened with Amber Geiger, and there was this big thing, I mean, within the Black community about that very thing. Like, all right, so we have to forgive? And when that young man came up and hugged and said, it's okay, God forgives you, I'm praying for you, there was this tension within the Black community. Like, I'm talking about within Black Christians going,
right.
Yeah, I forgive you, and you bet your butt going to jail. You should be going to jail for a long time. Like, why can't it be both and, you know? And so there's this tension within the church, and that's why I did ask the question and gear it toward Black Christian, between Christians, and how we're dealing with it in the church, because, you know, this is probably America's oldest sin, but America is not the church. The church is the church, as Theo talked about. And so the polarizing is along race has had to happen almost because it's been almost necessary, you know what I mean, as Marcus said earlier. So there's this real tension, and I do believe that the more we talk about it, and converse within our communities and across the table in the aisle, the more healing can occur. But I think the conversations have to be had.
I think Nick hit the nail on the head right now in terms of the level of explosiveness, because you've got explosiveness there, you've got explosiveness from the far crazy right wing, mostly Caucasian people that are thinking their rights are being violated because they have to put on a mask. And I think the biggest thing right now is just, okay, how does everybody bring down the temperature, bring down the level of explosiveness? Because otherwise, whether it's this or something else, or the people with guns going to Michigan or whatever, something's going to blow up. We're in this thing where it's just the fuse just needs a little bit of gasoline. The whole place is going to burn.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same language that Dr. James Cone uses, right? When he talks about that there's this sort of hose that's just been clinched, and that's it. And we've only clinched it, and there's still water building up and building up and building up. And we see little spurts of it, you know, a little bit of water got out here, a little bit of water got out here, and you see spurts of racism here and there. That explosion, I mean, what do we do with that? How do we, it's, you know, it's, unfortunately, it's still there. We've just stopped it a little bit, right?
Right. Yeah, we talk about it. The thing is, and the thing that gets me upset is that we have, like, right now we're talking about because of Ahmaud, right? And then it dies down, right? And then we stop talking about it anymore. And then another Black person has to be shot and killed for us to talk about it again, right? Then it's like, and then it's hypersensitive. And then, you know, for white people, I feel, or not for all white people, but it seems like for some white people, it's like, okay, we've talked about it. Now we can move on. We've had this conversation. Black people are still hurting. Another Black person shot and killed. At some point, you know, what's the straw, right? What's the straw? And I think with the Botham Jean brother hugging Amber Geiger, and just the compassion of forgiveness and that mercy, I think it was great. I think it was really strong. I know maybe not in that moment I couldn't do it. I think it really showed Jesus. But at the same time, I saw a lot of white people say, see, you should forgive. See, there should be this forgiveness. There should be this, like, this, you know, this mercy towards, but I don't see that same mercy towards African American people. And just in these cases where, you know, a Black man is shot and killed. I mean, this happens over and over and over again. To a certain point, it's like, damn, all right, I'll grab a gun then, you know, I'll protect myself, right? I'm trying to have these conversations, but we don't want to talk about them until another tragedy, another PTSD, another trauma. I'm a psychology nerd, psychology major. So yeah, another just, you know, traumatic thing happens, you know? So I think that's what is a frustrating thing too of African American culture and community, is that we're, you know, people will say that we're, you know, we love you, we're here for you. But then these conversations kind of die down into the next hashtag.
You know, Nick, I think the book is an answer to that, because they're having these conversations consistently and on a regular basis, and they're not holding back. So I think that's an answer, right? Getting the right person to the table to join in that conversation, to hear in the hearts of white, black, whatever. Because at this point, we all care about this issue. We all care about it. Now, it's interesting to me when I see people blow up about hashtag Black Lives Matter, but don't blow up about hashtag Blue Lives Matter. Well, I've happened to spend time with police officers and I hear their stories. So guess what? Blue lives do matter, but Black lives also matter. So I think to answer to your question is a continuation of this. This didn't happen over a short period of years. This is over 100 years. You know, this is a long fix. It may not be fixed in our generation, but maybe our grandchildren's generation.
Yeah.
So the answer is don't stop. Don't stop the conversation. I do believe the power of a conversation can change your life. I'm an advocate of that.
For sure.
So that's how we're going to change it. And I think that, I think Bob and Arnita and Wayne have did a phenomenal job in their book.
Yes,
And
they
I
have.
think, bringing in just everyday voices to the table to have dialogue. And then we take this conversation out and continue the dialogue honestly. Today, my podcast is exactly what I'm talking about with Christina Laster. She's a civil rights activist who's just radical, right? So we're going to continue this conversation, and hopefully someone hears and say, let me do something. I have a friend, Shakira, who we've had these dialogues. She's a white woman, a Republican, and she had no idea that this was happening. Wow. Now that we've had these conversations, she's so woke and she's radically fighting with us. So I think that's how we do it.
Another key thing too is, I often have that same thought of what can I do? I'm just one person. What can I do to help change the situation? And I think about, God has entrusted me with 4 children, and they're looking at me, at how I respond to situations, and it's kind of like spreading that seed. I'm planting these seeds with them, and then they go out and influence their friends who then influence their friends. And it's really about planting those seeds with those generations that are coming up behind us. I have 4 biracial children. I have a nephew who is half white, half Mexican. His mother's genes are very strong. So he's got a very Hispanic name, but he's got blonde hair, blue eyes. And so, I've had honest conversations with him about, hey, the color of your skin provides you some advantages that even your dad doesn't have because he's a darker skinned Mexican person. And these are the things, this is, how you can use that as a blessing to others or to help others. Or be mindful when you are running around the neighborhood with my son, who is a year younger. You have to stop and think about, if you guys get yourselves into trouble, people are looking at my kid first and not looking at you. And so I think that's the key, is really having those conversations, like Arnita said earlier, with our kids, and, and planting those seeds so that way they don't grow up, because these kids are learning it from somewhere. Like my 11-year-old was playing basketball with some friends, and these other kids came up to him and said, I don't understand how you're so good at this. You're not dark-skinned enough. I mean, like, the darker skin he is, the better of the basketball player he's going to be. It's just, that's the kind of thing, and they're learning it somewhere. And we have to start having those educational conversations with our kids, because they are inheriting this society from us.
Yeah.
Everybody's just so much more hopeful than me, which is partly why I didn't. I mean, I'm just being honest, right? I mean, partly why I didn't even answer Gilbert's first question. I was one of 2 people that didn't answer anything, right? Because I didn't want to be a sort of downer, on the whole question, because, we've been talking, if we go back to Lauren's example of, you just need to light a match because all of the lighter fluid or all of the sort of, it's ready to go. Is there even a way? And I mean, it seems so far away from me and so far away for our society. Is there even a way to get rid of the lighter fluid that's there, right? Or is that potentiality always going to be there? Are we always going to be, waiting for that next moment, for that next explosion? I mean, is there a way to even mop it up, to make it as if that, I mean, it's just so, I feel so hopeless.
I'll share an example. My husband's he's a firefighter, a police officer, and a paramedic. So here is, from the fire aspect, they often have controlled burns to help control larger fires, to help stop the spread. So, metaphorically, maybe there is a way to use that lighter fluid to control it, have a control burn. Like let's start these civilized conversations that start a fire within people who then want to then go out and have similar conversations with other people, instead of, exploding and cussing out the first white person you see or something. I don't know.
Maybe cussing out the first white person you see will start the conversation.
That's true. It's true. Maybe not the conversation we want to have, but it will be a conversation for sure.
Nonetheless,
slightly more controlled burn.
Yeah.
I think systemically speaking, unfortunately, I'm also kind of like in Mark's camp in terms of, if we're talking about in the context of the United States,
right?
I have very low hope, just because. So when She Power was saying it's not overnight, it's been 100 years. It's actually been since Black bodies have intersected with America.
Mm-hmm.
So from day one, written into the Constitution, written into the context, you can do exegesis of those documents and see that the issue's already been there. Whether you're talking about gender, whether you're talking about race, those forms of oppressions have always been there. And so the real conversation is America, someone once asked if I thought America could do away with racism. And my question was, well, if we did away with racism, would we still be America? Because it's so foundational to who we are.
Mm-hmm.
McDonald's stopped making burgers. Is it still McDonald's? Now the hope, so from that standpoint, I would be hopeless. Now the hope comes from, well, for us, we don't just deal in American context, we're dealing in the kingdom context. So can we have God's kingdom ushered in and we operate in that? But outside of operating in God's kingdom, my wife and I, we've considered just, moving, leaving the context is so volatile as far as the history of it. Unless we're going to go revisit our Constitution, which other countries have done. There's been countries who have renamed themselves, renamed the Constitution and said, we wasn't around when we founded this, but we're renouncing this. So barring that type of repentance and turning away from that, I think we're going to see this systemically. But what we can do change is what we're doing here today on a personal level, on a community level. Oh, I definitely have a lot of hope. I have more white friends than ever who, because of COVID-19, because of some quote unquote oppression, inconvenience, they're getting the light bulb. And so I'm hopeful in that regard, but not systemically. I'm not hopeful at all.
Well, we didn't write the book to be able to overturn systemic issues in the culture. Our conversations were, we can change this one person at a time, one event, one decision, one time of positioning yourself to be the reverse minority in a room, one. It's the power of one, which is why I think this book is so relevant. And I'm not trying to sell the book. I just think it's so relevant because it's so different. Again, if we can have conversations and try to understand better another I cannot tell you the number of times I've had coffee with someone and people would go, wow, I have never thought of it that way. I have never. When you start hearing people say that, you are chipping away at a paradigm that they have in their mind. And that's what we have to do. We have to chip away at paradigms. At the end of the day, God loves us all, and there's this kingdom thing, yes, but we operate in a kingdom mentality and in a real mentality simultaneously. It's the power of simultaneous. We're in both at the same time. So we can't let one cannibalize the other every time. We have to learn how to mutually exist in those. Certainly if one has to be the top, it's the kingdom one, but we're not doing so well with that. So I think if we all will address ourselves with deeper levels of truth, personal truth first, then God will help us and we will get answers and we will have hope where it seems hopeless. I'm not giving up. And Wayne can tell you, there are days I get tired. When this child got shot in Georgia, got killed in Georgia, for about 3 days, I was sick.
Right.
I just was sick. I just couldn't think about it. I have 2 boys who run. But you know what? After about 3 days, I told him, I said, I'm gonna put my warrior princess stuff back on and I'm getting ready to get back after it. I think we did that in an email, but still it's one person at a time. I want everyone to have hope. This whole thing right now is God ordained for us to have these type of conversations.
Right.
And you know, whether the church is on the forefront of it or not, I think what we see in the church is, instead of the word reconciliation, we're not putting something back together. We're really introducing people to new family.
Yeah.
We haven't been together. We've been super segregated. So I think if we kind of shift the way we see that a little bit, it may help. But I'm not in leadership at a church right now. So I think just keep hope. We have. Well,
you should be.
I'm a little bit radical, I don't know. All these pastors on the call, maybe want to hire me, I don't know.
I
have a
I know
question.
that Bob.
Mark, you had stated that you didn't feel hopeful about change, if I understood you correctly.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Arnita did a good job sort of laying out the sort of, Arnita and Theo actually both did really well in laying out the sort of distinction between a sort of, micro change versus maybe a macro change,
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fair enough. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, nonetheless, I still feel very hopeful. I mean, I teach over 200 students every semester, with a pretty mixed in terms of race and everything that's coming through my classes. But, I do feel hopeful in those conversations that we're having those conversations. Partly, I'm also wondering too how much really the church adds to or not. I mean, we've all sort of talked about this, and it's sort of been the basis of this discussion. But I don't think the church is. Not only is the church not pushing this agenda forward, I think at times it's actually pulling it back. Unfortunately. And that's the hope that I'm losing right there. I mean, that's really the big one. That communities of faith and things seem to be doing a worse of a job than people who have no. I mean, the scriptures are so filled with a basis for this stuff, right? I mean, that there is no divisions between people. That there are divisions, but that they're supposed to be enjoyed and glorified rather than sort of being something negative. But that's the big question. I feel like the church is pulling it back further than we could be if we didn't have the church in the way. Almost, I don't know.
So I think that this is why these kind of platforms are important, because if you have a tradition that isn't working, then you have to create a new tradition. I'll give you an example, completely irrelevant to this conversation, but I know change can happen. Raising 2 Black boys, and Anita, you probably can relate, and maybe you can't. I was an advocate that they marry a woman that looks like me, and I was loud about it, and I was consistent about it. It was so bad that one day my son said, "Mom, I think you're a little racist." It's like, how can I be racist, right? I have so many white girlfriends. Oh my God, I love my girlfriends. We have a great time. He says, because love is love. And it wasn't until in our academy, I have an academy called She Power Leadership Academy. We have a lot of biracial girls, that I got the lesson. And that's when my heart changed, from those little girls who are biracial, who are displaced, who someone like me have judged them because of the way they look, and I didn't know I was judging them. So there is hope. And it was that moment that I was ashamed of myself, because I didn't know, because I thought I was doing the right thing. So there is hope. And how did that happen? From a conversation in our power circles when these little girls shared their heart, and I was ashamed of myself and I had to apologize. And from that moment, I have worked consistently to check myself. I'm passionate about things, but I have to check myself.
Right.
And so there are many people who are going to hear this conversation and something's going to touch them and they're going to check themselves. I will call one of my white girlfriends and ask her straight up, or my black girlfriends, my Asian girls, my Ethiopian, whatever. I have girlfriends all across the world. But how do we create change? By checking yourself. It was in that moment when a little 11-year-old girl shared her heart. And I said, oh my God, I've got to change. So there is hope, Mark, on a macro level as well.
Yeah.
That's my story and I'm sticking to it.
You know, I think sometimes, Mark, the frustration, because I have it at times too, is when this thing for me is a priority. For a lot of leaders, it's not a priority.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of, where is it on the priority level? I don't think some people intentionally leave this off. I think it's uncomfortable and I think it's not a priority.
Yeah.
But I love the local church. I think I love the body of Christ. I really do. I really do. And all of its glory and in all of its crazy and of all of its dysfunction. It's like a good family. But some things are priorities at some times and at other times they are not. I will agree with you. At this season, I think this type of conversation is screaming to be had with the local church. I do.
Absolutely.
That's a good start.
It's the right time.
Yeah.
And that's why I want to talk to my leader. I mean, because especially
right
my church, they're like, hey, we're intentionally trying to be multicultural. But they've never came. I've been going to church for 5 years. They've never came to me or come to the other. There's only like 8 Black people at our church to ask, or people of color to ask, like, hey, how are we doing with being multicultural? Is it enough to have one Black pastor on staff? Is it enough to, you know what I mean? Like, how are we being a multicultural church? How do you feel represented? And Bob can speak to this. We have a group in Bakersfield called Common Ground, and I love it. It's every Monday. It's Christians, and we meet at someone's house, and we talk. We have these face to face, because it's harder. See, it's harder to talk face to face. You know, on Zoom or on phone call, it's kind of easy. But when you look to someone face to face and have this conversation, that's where it gets uncomfortable. And we've had a few pastors come. But yeah, it's at someone's house, and we have it's a forum just like this, and we have a meal, we have some food, and we have these tough conversations. And that's huge for Bakersfield, California. Trust me, that's very, very huge. Right, Bob?
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, it's a big deal, and you're right. There have been times that you've made the room uncomfortable, Nick, because you're just honest. But I even talk about this in the book. The very first time that we met, I found a lot of humor and some comfort in the fact that our hosts asked right out of the gate, so what do we call you? Is it African Americans or is it Black? And I thought, oh my gosh, what did he just ask? And but it was one of those questions that set the tone for where we were going.
Right.
I appreciated that. And
Ladies
guys,
and gentlemen, this has been a wonderful conversation, Bob, but I got to run.
I was just going to say, we've been going for 2 hours.
Really long.
We're gonna cut this off, and maybe we need.
But let's do it again.
Yeah.
Let's do it again.
Yeah.
From our fellow Bakersfieldians, I'm in town as well. Nick, I've never met you. Look forward to meeting you. Dr. Lamas, you're at CSUB. I'm at Bakersfield College. Look forward to meeting you.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I'm a Fresno State boy, so I'm gonna come see you. So I gotta make my rounds. I got the way it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
I look forward. I'll get your contact information from Bob, but I gotta run. Somebody's at.
Don't forget who invited you to the dance.
Thank you, Prater. Love you, man. You my guy.
Thanks, guys. Nice meeting you guys. See you later.
Thank you, everyone, for joining the call.
Bye.
Yes, blessings.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, we'll hook up soon.